There's a lot of buzz around the coronavirus right now as it continues to spread and gain momentum in the media. There's a lot of questions floating around about how business insurance might play a role in all of this. The biggest concerns being workers' comp, what happens if one of my employees contracts the virus, and business interruption. What if I have to shut the business down? I want to address those situations and explain what those policies are designed to cover and why it's unlikely that they would respond to the coronavirus. If we start with workers' comp, there is an occupational illness component to the policy. However, for the illness to be occupational, two things must occur. It must be contracted during the course of employment, and it must be contracted because of employment conditions that create an elevated risk of developing an illness that is specific to the occupation that the general public is not exposed to. The most classic example of an occupational illness would be a coal miner who develops black lung disease. The employment conditions of a coal miner create an elevated risk of inhaling coal dust that the general public is not exposed to. The same would be true for somebody who remediates mold or asbestos. The general public is not frequently exposed to mold or asbestos, but in the occupation of remediation, there's an increased exposure to those hazards and thus a greater likelihood of developing an illness that the general public wouldn't normally develop. So as it relates to the coronavirus, unless we're talking about a research scientist whose job is to study and work with the virus itself, someone who simply contracts the virus while at work would probably not be sufficient enough to trigger coverage as an occupational illness. This would explain why there's not a huge spike in workers' comp claims every year during flu season. When the flu is prevalent, everyone's exposed to it, regardless of their occupation. And it's very difficult to prove that your employment conditions created an elevated exposure to the virus and was the reason why they got the flu. One possible exception to this would be the healthcare industry, but more specifically those who work in hospitals whose job is to treat the ill. They at least would have the best argument at claiming that their occupation created an elevated exposure, since after all they do have to treat those that are ill, but it'll still be an uphill battle because if insurers view the coronavirus through the same lens as they do the flu, which is pretty likely considering how widespread it is already and how quickly it's continuing to spread, it's still going to be difficult to prove whether or not they contracted the virus at work or outside of work. It'll be interesting to see how this develops, but thankfully medical professionals are the best equipped at taking the proper precautions to avoid contracting the virus. As far as business interruptions go, there's a concern that local cities and towns may shut down to try to contain the spread of the virus. This would be civil authority coverage, which is part of business income. These situations are common out west. Think of California during all those raging brush fires. Local authorities were evacuating nearby towns and cities for safety purposes. This is also pretty common in many coastal areas when hurricanes are approaching landfall. The problem with civil authority and business interruption in general is that these are property coverages. There must be direct physical damage to property, like a fire burning your building down, or even a fire burning all the buildings down around you and local authorities force you to evacuate, thus preventing you from conducting business. So unless insurers view coronavirus as something that could cause property damage, which is probably a stretch given that there's already built-in exclusions for pollution-related incidences, microorganisms, bacteria, it's unlikely that business interruption would be triggered. So aside from all of that, I know this wasn't the most positive message. I'm not speaking in absolute terms by any means at all. Every situation should be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. There are different policy forms, there are different state laws. I am merely just expressing how the insurance industry is likely to respond to this situation. Who knows? This thing could evolve into something that completely invalidates everything that I've just said. But we will continue to monitor it every step of the way and provide you with relevant updates as they come forth. If you found this video informative, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up, drop a comment down below. And if you have any questions or think you're in a unique situation, feel free to drop me a line. I'd be happy to talk to you about it. In the meantime, stay safe out there. I'm gonna go wash my hands.